Call me Ethan now, 31, senior platform engineer at a bland supply chain software company. Nobody brags about at parties. We build routing dashboards, shipment tracking tools, inventory sync garbage, all the invisible stuff. Clients only notice when it explodes. Office smells like stale coffee, warm plastic, and air conditioning that lost the will to live sometime during the Obama years. Most people there specialize in looking collaborative, while a tiny handful of us quietly keep revenue from catching fire. My old director was Ron Graybeard, tired eyes, zero appetite for management. Theater, Ron only cared whether the system held together when clients leaned on it. Then there was Nate from infrastructure built like a fridge, barely spoke, somehow always answered midnight incidents before the rest of us found our passwords between Ron, Nate, and me. The ugly problems usually died fast enough that executives could keep pretending process solved everything. I was the quiet one in the back corner with the ugly mug and the clean ticket history. My notes were useful, my code usually worked, my ego stayed off the floor and out of meetings for a long time. That was enough to survive. There, Ron never asked for performance speeches, personal truth circles, or inspirational garbage about bringing your full self to work. If you solved the thing, you stayed employed. If you saved a client, he remembered if you were reliable. He stopped breathing down your neck forever. That was basically his version of affection. Our biggest account belonged to a man named Mr. Talbot ran a manufacturing group and hated fluff almost as much as Ron did uptime. Clean reporting, predictable rollback plans, that was his religion. About a year before, everything went rotten. Talbot's customer portal, cratered right in the middle of invoicing week office, turned into a zoo within minutes. Managers yelling, analysts panicking, directors spawning emergency meetings every half hour. Like rabbits, people love brainstorming in public instead of checking logs in private, which is how disasters get promoted from bad to legendary. I threw on headphones, ignored the parade, and traced the failure chain by hand around 1:40 in the morning. I found it one broken character buried in deployment config. One stupid symbol had turned an entire billing pipe into expensive dead air. I patched it, verified the recovery twice, left a short note, and went home. Next morning, there was fresh coffee waiting on my desk, and Ron gave me one of his little approval nods. 5 minutes later, Talbot emailed me, 6 words, "Good catch, Ethan. Lunch on me." That was the exact amount of recognition I wanted. Quiet, useful, attached to real work. Then Ron announced retirement, and the whole room got colder without a single window moving. We did cake, signatures, fake smiles, the usual office funeral for competence before he left. He shook my hand and gave me one warning in front of everybody. Keep your head low, keep your notes clean, and never trust consultants who grin too much. 3 days later, HR introduced our new director. Vanessa official announcement called, her transformational, systems-aware, people-centered, and committed to reimagining team culture. I read the email twice and still learned nothing, except trouble had finally found parking. Vanessa's first day started with a mandatory meeting that somehow ate 90 minutes. She walked in smiling, like she had arrived to rescue us from ourselves, instead of clients' deadlines, architecture debt, or product risk. She opened with emotional infrastructure. She said our department needed to dismantle outdated masculine habits around work, leadership, and communication. She talked about psychological safety, relational repair, and collaborative accountability, like they were civil rights legislation. I kept waiting for delivery targets, migration status, or literally anything attached to the software we were paid to maintain. None of that came, just cleaner branding on older nonsense. Then she started introductions and told everybody to share their workplace truth. A project lead, named Brianna, nearly levitated with excitement and jumped in. First, Brianna had a gift for sounding productive while saying almost nothing that could be measured. She spoke for 5 straight minutes about visibility, unseen labor, and finally feeling empowered to show up whole. Vanessa looked at her like a preacher, hearing the perfect first testimony. Then my turn came, and the room pivoted toward me all at once. I kept it simple, because simple used to be normal in engineering, said my name, my role, and that I mainly handled the Talbot systems, plus reliability work on the back end. Vanessa smiled tighter and asked how I felt about stepping into our new collaborative future. I said, the work was interesting, the problems were hard, and I liked solving them. Silence hit hard enough to hear the lights buzzing overhead. Vanessa nodded slowly like she was labeling a specimen. Right, she said, then moved on, while dripping disappointment from every syllable. That tiny exchange basically wrote the rules. For the next week after that, she rolled out mandatory morning circles before anybody could start actual work every day. We sat in a ring and shared emotions, intentions, and support commitments, entire hour gone, before a keyboard even warmed up. Brianna loved it instantly because her favorite resource had always been other people's attention. She'd say she felt stretched but held, anxious but grateful, challenged but deeply seen. Vanessa praised her constantly for modeling brave emotional leadership. When it got to me, I'd say something like, "I'm good and I need to close 3 critical tickets before lunch." Vanessa started cutting me off in public before I finished even those short sentences. "Ethan, brevity can read as avoidance," she'd say. "Your silence creates uncertainty for teammates trying to build authentic safety." I told her, "I'm just a quiet guy, and I usually communicate through work that holds up." She cut right over me and called that an outdated masculine coping pattern that needed reflection. Rest of the room stared down at the table like kids pretending not to watch somebody hit a mine. Then she decided our emails needed emotional calibration before they could be considered culturally healthy. Apparently my update notes were too blunt, too cold, too machine-shaped. She pulled me into her office and opened one of my deployment messages. "Patch complete, no errors. Found? Rollback not needed. Monitoring live for 2 hours." According to Vanessa, that language communicated hostility toward people's nervous systems. Then she opened an update Brianna had sent the week before. 5 paragraphs, 6. Exclamation points, smiley face, energy all over it. Almost no technical meaning whatsoever. Vanessa leaned back like she had just revealed fine art. "See how warm this feels? Ethan, people need care, not compressed directives." I told her both emails contained the same information. Mine just respected everyone's time. Her whole face hardened. "Right there, efficiency ideology is the problem," she said. "Not the solution. People are not machines. And your communication keeps pretending they are." After that, everything began breaking in exactly the stupid way you would expect. 1 hour vanished every morning and several more every week to alignment, workshops, and reflection sessions. Deadlines got tighter. Client patience got thinner. Real work migrated quietly onto my evenings. Brianna talked nonstop about support and process, still couldn't land much without somebody rescuing her. Behind the curtain, I started fixing her busted configs after hours just to protect shared accounts from burning. Vanessa only saw the meetings, though, never the midnight patches, never the disasters swallowed whole before sunrise. Brianna looked engaged because she talked. I looked resistant because I listened. One afternoon, a small feature on Talbot's environment started showing ugly memory pressure. Vanessa gave Brianna ownership because she wanted distributed leadership opportunities. I checked the code and found the issue in about 5 minutes during review. I tried warning them before the thing hit. Traffic told them that query wrapper would leak under sustained load unless we reworked it. Vanessa snapped toward me before Brianna had even finished understanding the warning. "Ethan, public criticism isn't supportive, especially when someone is leading bravely." Brianna immediately arranged her face into wounded disappointment, and the room accepted that. As evidence, she said she had thought very carefully about the implementation. I shut up because arguing with theater only gives theater better lights. 2 days later, the feature collapsed exactly where I said. It would response times, dragged queues, backed up. Then the whole thing folded during peak client usage. Talbot called furious enough that even Vanessa stopped speaking in workshop vocabulary. She dragged everybody into an emergency room and wrapped Brianna in reassurance before anyone touched a keyboard. "This isn't about your leadership value. Brianna pressure reveals systems, not people." Then she turned to me, wearing the innocent face knives. "Use right before work starts. Ethan, if you saw the risk, why didn't you offer more proactive support?" I stared at her long enough that a couple people shifted in their chairs. "I did offer support," I said. "You shut it down in front of everybody." Vanessa shook her head, like I had missed the spiritual point. "No, you offered criticism, not collaborative ownership." Huge difference. Anger came up, metallic in the back of my throat. I swallowed it and said, "The only useful thing left, I'll fix it." Then walked out before I said something expensive. That night, I rebuilt Brianna's implementation from the ground up by sunrise. The release path was cleaner than the original requirement deserved. I sent a 2-line update and went home to shower in complete silence 3 weeks later. Vanessa scheduled my formal performance review. She opened by saying my technical output remained acceptable under present expectations. Then came the real script. My interpersonal alignment with team culture was severely lacking. According to her notes, I was hard to approach, negative, emotionally withheld, and undermining to peers. She cited my quietness, my direct email style, and my resistance during morning circles. She said, I still behaved like execution alone, justified my place there. I pointed out Talbot had never once complained about my actual work. I pointed out I closed more critical incidents than anyone else in the department. Vanessa raised one hand and cut me off, like she'd practiced it. You keep invoking Mr. Talbot, as if personal dependence excuses outdated behavior. That dynamic is part of the old boys club structure we're moving beyond. Then, she leaned forward and softened her voice into that teacher tone people use with potentially dangerous kids. Change is hard for men. Rewarded for stoicism and lone wolf competence myths. The workplace is evolving. You need emotional range, not just technical skill. Do the emotional work. Ethan code alone cannot make you valuable. Hear something inside me went very quiet, then, not shattered, just done arguing. I nodded, told her I'd reflect, and left, before contempt showed on my face. Back at my desk, the planning board already had Brianna listed as lead on the next major phase. I sat underneath her name, as technical support felt less like an assignment and more like a threat. For the next month, I tried playing their game just enough to stay invisible in circles. I invented safe feelings that sounded aligned and socially nutritious. My emails grew little greetings, softeners, and decorative concern around otherwise simple updates felt filthy, like wearing somebody else's smile stretched over my own skin. Vanessa noticed fast and rewarded me in front of everybody. Wonderful growth. Ethan, she said one morning, like she'd finally house-trained a wolf underneath all that approved language. The work kept rotting anyway. Brianna led the next platform expansion, like a woman hosting a wellness retreat during surgery. She promised impossible deadlines straight to Talbot, without consulting engineering, once designed features that actively contradicted the database structure we already had. I raised concerns gently using Vanessa's favorite vocabulary. Maybe this route could introduce latency under heavier throughput, just something to keep in mind. Collaboratively, Vanessa still defended Brianna every single time, without opening the code. Let's not weaponize caution against innovation. Ethan heard that line enough to memorize the rhythm. I was trapped inside support responsibility, without permission to steer any of the decisions likely to kill us, basically expected to perform miracles after being forbidden to prevent disasters. Then, the cliff edge arrived. Talbot was considering a massive contract extension tied to the new platform phase. Whole pitch depended on demoing Brianna's shiny flagship feature under real load. 1 week before presentation, it became obvious the core build was dead. On arrival, slow, unstable, fragile one load, test away from public humiliation. For the first time, Vanessa stopped saying journey and started saying fix. Brianna cried in the war room and said the pressure felt abusive. Everybody looked at me like some ugly household god they'd mocked until the roof caught fire. Vanessa's face had changed too. No philosophy left on it, just fear wearing expensive lipstick. Ethan, she said quietly, can you save this by Monday for one beautiful second? I almost told her to collaborate her way out of it. Instead, I saw Talbot in my head and heard Ron's old rule again. Clients pay for outcomes, not morality pageants, so I nodded, spent the next 3 days living inside that system, like a ghost mechanic, slept in 90-minute scraps on a lobby couch under fluorescent lights that made everything feel sick, threw out Brianna's architecture completely because repairing it would waste time. We didn't own, rolled back to the last stable branch and rebuilt from known, good principles coded, tested, profiled, patched, benchmarked, verified, repeated until the graphs finally behaved. Nobody interrupted me, because by then they all understood. Interference had a body count presentation. Morning, I finished final diagnostics with less than an hour. Left system was faster than before, cleaner than before, and stable under heavy load. Sent Vanessa one sentence, it's ready. Then changed into a clean shirt in the restroom by the time I got to the boardroom. Executives were already seated. Talbot sat with his directors, looking appropriately unconvinced by everybody's performance. Smiles. Upper management lined one wall, pretending calm. Vanessa stood at the front, glowing again, fully restored by my lack of sleep. I took a chair near the back, expecting maybe technical questions, if things got serious. Instead, Vanessa started telling a story about collective resilience and culture-powered breakthrough thinking. Then she put the team photo on the screen and began thanking key leaders. "I especially want to recognize Brianna," she said. Her vision carried us through complexity. She called Brianna's leadership strategic, courageous, and foundational to the final product. Brianna blushed on cue and arranged her face into humble disbelief for the execs. Then Vanessa demoed my rebuilt system while narrating Brianna's supposed late-night perseverance. Every feature worked perfectly, because of course it did. I had written the whole thing alone. Talbot looked impressed. Upper management looked relieved. Applause showed up right on schedule. Nobody said my name, not once. Not even by accident. Weirdest part was, I didn't feel angry. Anger would have at least had heat in it. I felt empty, like some internal breaker finally flipped and shut off a room for good while they celebrated. I stood up and left. Without anybody noticing back at my desk, I opened an old message from a recruiter competitor she'd mentioned months before, had kept checking in every couple weeks. I replied with one sentence asking whether the offer still stood, then opened a blank document and wrote my resignation on the spot. 2 paragraphs, professional tone. 2 weeks' notice, no blame, no catharsis, no drama. Hitting send felt less rebellious than medically necessary. After that, I spent the rest of the day documenting every system I owned. Architecture maps, service dependencies, warning notes, script, purposes, deploy, order, failure, triggers. I wrote everything down because professionalism still mattered to me, even if appreciation clearly didn't. Vanessa never came by my desk. After the resignation email landed, she replied with one word, acknowledged, told me more than a speech would have. Next morning, she announced my departure during the mandatory feelings circle voice, bright enough to sound fake even through fluorescent hum. Ethan has chosen a new opportunity, and we fully support his next chapter. Then she pivoted directly into celebrating internal growth and emerging leadership. Brianna, she said, would assume full ownership of the Talbot environment. Everybody offered those little sympathetic looks people give when they don't want eye contact. Caught on camera. Brianna visited later with a notebook and confidence so performative it almost looped back into comedy. "Okay, Ethan, just walk me through the important parts, like all of it." I asked what she specifically needed. Her face fell immediately. She had no language for the system, only names of meetings and people. I handed her the architecture packet, and she stared at it like it was weather. Then she asked if Talbot's executive assistant preferred almonds or dark chocolate. Because relationship management mattered, I gave her the full documentation, over 200 pages. Every warning labeled, every dependency clear, told her everything she needed was there. If she actually read it before touching anything, she laughed and said she was more of an intuitive learner right there. I knew the whole place was finished, even if no one else had felt the floor drop. Yet my final week felt like haunting a building that had already buried me. Vanessa doubled down on process theater the second the designated villain announced his exit. One entire morning circle turned into a debate over poster colors for a communal affirmation. While on my last day, I cleared my desk in under 10 minutes, never kept much there, besides notebooks, adapters, and tools. Nobody borrowed correctly. A few decent coworkers shook my hand and muttered, "Good luck," like they were passing contraband. Vanessa gave me one last stage smile in front of the department. "We'll miss your contributions, Ethan." "Don't be a stranger," I nodded, said, "Take care," dropped my badge, and walked out without turning around. The relief outside hit hard enough to feel like dizziness. New company welcomed me with better pay, better hardware, and one radical change during interviews. Their CTO spent an hour asking technical questions instead of personality, mythology, scaling ideas, architecture calls, failure, models, trade-offs. Nobody asked me to share my emotional weather before talking. Shop felt like finding oxygen. After months in somebody else's scented basement, took a week off before starting and spent most of it hiking in silence. Then Friday afternoon, an unknown number called while I was halfway through lunch. "This is Talbot," the voice said, and I sat up straight. Immediately, Talbot did not waste words asking how vacation was treating me. Been trying to reach you through your old office for 2 days. They keep bouncing me to Brianna, and now I'm irritated. I told him plainly I no longer worked there and had left the previous Friday. Silence afterward was sharp enough that I checked the screen to make sure the call hadn't died. They let you go, he asked. Sounded more offended than surprised. I said I resigned and left it there, hoping he'd take the clean version. Obviously he didn't. Men like Talbot can smell sanitized lies through the phone, drop the corporate phrasing. Ethan, what happened over there? So I told him calmly. In order, no speeches, no dramatic seasoning, new manager feelings, over facts, warnings, ignored. System rebuilt. Public credit handed elsewhere. When I finished, he stayed quiet long enough for a bird to land on the railing near me. Then he asked one last question in a voice already going cold. The woman taking credit was Brianna and the manager was Vanessa. Yes, I said. By then, honesty helped more people than loyalty. Thank you, Ethan. I prefer facts to theater. Then he hung up without goodbye, and somehow that felt promising. Monday at the new job started clean, quiet, almost suspiciously adult. Around noon, the recruiter appeared and asked if I could come upstairs to leadership. New CTO stood beside a monitor, wearing the kind of smile money creates on the screen. Sat Talbot looking happier than I'd ever seen him. There he is, Talbot said. The only engineer who ever answered my worst calls correctly. CTO looked between us and asked how long this history went back. Talbot gave one short laugh and said, long enough to trust him with expensive disasters. Then he dropped the actual bomb without any ceremony at all. I terminated my agreement with your former company this morning. Effective immediately, turns out, our lawyers had a key person clause tied to Ethan from years ago, when he resigned and they concealed it. They breached operational trust. My old company's biggest contract had just vanished because they buried competence under choreography. Then Talbot leaned closer and changed my week. Maybe my whole career. I'm not merely moving the account, he said. I'm funding a dedicated division. You build it there, you run it, and you choose every engineer I want. Ethan leading infrastructure strategy with direct access to my executive team. My CTO looked stunned for about 3 seconds before becoming extremely interested in the future. We'd be honored, he said. Ethan already has my full confidence. Talbot nodded and added one more gift, wrapped in revenge and respect. Poach anybody competent from the old place if they'll take your call. Rest of the afternoon vanished into lawyers, NDAs, capacity plans, and extremely serious coffee. By sunset, the outline existed. New division, dedicated budget, multi-year commitment. My name on the top line, went home exhausted and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Not because I doubted it, because order was returning a little too cleanly to feel real. 2 days later, an old coworker texted me. 3 words: complete chaos. Here attached an internal memo announcing an executive audit of our old department. Apparently losing the largest client in company history had finally awakened the actual CEO. He came down personally and demanded logs, timelines, and decision trails. Vanessa tried blaming toxic resistance, bad team energy, and my uncollaborative style almost immediately to his credit. The CEO asked for documents instead of vibes. Documents were a massacre for her. I had kept everything clean. Meeting notes showed ignored warnings, suppressed reviews, and false attribution after the rescue. Weekend email trails showed Vanessa praising Brianna for work. Time stamped from my credentials, and commit history performance files showed competence marked down, while emotional conformity got rewarded. Then audit pulled the deployment history from the final. Save my login touched every repaired component. Brianna spent the same weekend sending supportive check-in messages from home CEO, called an all hands that same afternoon, and didn't waste a second softening it. Failure to understand core operations? Those were the words my friend quoted right before security walked Vanessa out with a box. Brianna technically survived, but got reassigned to internal communications by the next morning. According to my friend, she crashed staging within an hour of her first attempt at real ownership. After that, they gave her newsletters, surveys, and nothing connected to production ever again. Meanwhile, my new division started taking shape around actual work and deserved trust. Nate joined first after hearing the phrase, sane leadership and direct accountability. One analyst from the old office followed, once the smoke cleared enough to breathe. Talbot visited personally during our first week and walked every desk without an entourage. Shook hands, asked technical questions. Actually listened to the answers. When he reached me, he set a cup by my keyboard. "Better coffee this time," he said. Nearly made me laugh. No speeches, no applause, just respect tied directly to something built, right, all I'd ever wanted, really. Somehow, now it came with authority too. Months later, our division beat every reliability target in the original proposal. Talbot expanded the budget again and offered equity tied to long-term stability. Sometimes balance comes back loudly. Mine came back through logs, clauses, and cold facts. Work was all that mattered in the end, and it always had been.